Now, the government suffered 5 defeats to its Rwanda bill in votes in the House of Lords last night, including an amendment forcing ministers to comply with international law. As if they wouldn't. Joining me now to discuss this, delighted to say, actually in the studio for once, immigration lawyer Ivon Sampson. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you. Also, Charlie Rowley, former government advisor, still with us as well. We were expecting a load of these votes, weren't we? It's not just sort of Liberals and crossbench peers and Labour peers who were going to be voting for amendments to the Rwanda bill. We need some of the more woke Tory peers as well. But we had 5 different losses. And basically, it's all about making sure the Act is fully compliant with the rule of law, international and domestic. Does any of this change anything about what actually happens to this bill and whether it's actually ever going to be passed by the Parliament and if we're ever going to see a plane take off to Rwanda?
Well, it can pass, because as you know, Julia, because you'll be familiar with parliamentary rules, that the government can always invoke the Parliament's Act at the end of the day.
You have this ping-pong where it goes backwards and forwards. At the end of the day, it's the Commons that has supremacy. The Prime Minister still has a majority in the House of Commons and can impose this.
But this interesting thing, does Parliament have a will to do anything it wants?
Yes, why shouldn't it? Well, I wish Parliament had more of a will to do stuff at all.
Well, I disagree with you. It doesn't, because no government can avoid judicial scrutiny. No government can do that. The only governments that do that are North Korea, countries like that. But no...
Now, we hear that a lot, this whole idea. And one of the things that lots of peers were arguing yesterday was this whole idea that, you know, the courts, the judges, the lawyers, they are upholding the rule of law. But when they interpret law, you know a lot of this is interpretation of Human Rights Act and other international agreements. When they interpret these things differently and therefore effectively change the law, which is what has been happening in the last 10, 20 years, then the government elected by the British people in a democratic vote, whether you agree with them or not, they have a democratic mandate. They have the right to change the law. The job of the courts is to uphold the law, is to enforce the law. It's not to change it, which is what they've been doing.
Well, let me tell you about the law then, is what they've got to comply with. So what the law says, and you've got to look at the evidence when you get to findings in law. And the Supreme Court, as you know, in November 2023, made findings that the Rwanda bill, Rwanda didn't have a proper administration of processing asylum claims. That's one of the things it said. And the other thing was it's generally not safe. And it's not safe, and it heard evidence from the UNCHR. It heard evidence from human rights NGOs like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And it made those findings because of evidence. So what the government had a problem now. Because
the government bill is basically saying, no, we decree effectively that Rwanda is a safe country.
We decree that I've got clothes on and the emperor's nude. That's what they're saying, right?
Okay.
And the other thing that had a problem was the flight. That was a second problem they had. There was an interim measure preventing the flights from going back because several individuals said it's not safe. So those 2 things the government thought they'd get round using this Rwanda bill. And that's what they've done.
Yeah, OK. Now, I know you've been looking into this, but, you know, a lot of people pointing out, well, if Rwanda is unsafe, why has the UN has criticised some of its bodies, the British government for saying they're going to send people to Rwanda who claim asylum after entering illegally to our country. But the UN has sent people there.
I think it's UNCHR. UN wouldn't get involved in this. But no, they have, but there's a difference. And the difference is this: you have a choice. Either you go to Rwanda or you don't, and that's a choice. So these are voluntary. People have volunteered to go to Rwanda. So things must be so bad wherever they are that in Rwanda doesn't seem that bad. But that doesn't mean to say...
What do you mean so bad wherever they are? So bad in the EU?
No, in terms of going back to their own country.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of these people they've been sent by the UN often even from European countries, for goodness sake.
I like the Israelis' approach. In 2013, they've been running the same Rwanda scheme. And what the Israelis do is they give you 3 choices. They say either you go to Rwanda, 2, you go back to your own country, or you remain in detention. I think that's going...
I'm quite happy with those 3 options.
Well, but the point is, you're not forced to go on a plane. But
again, you're not really forced to go on a plane because you could just say, OK, I'll go back to my home country.
Yes, you can. But remember...
So people do have that option at any time.
This is the problem for the government.
We have voluntary removals. We help pay for people's plane fares, for God's sake.
100%. And we've done that with Albania. So what the government needs to do is to have bilateral treaties with countries to repatriate people when they fail.
But we can't have bilateral treaties with Syria, with Iraq. Yeah, but exactly.
Correct.
But again, the question is whether the British people want those people here. Look, let's have a little watch and listen, though, to... We've been talking a lot about the church today. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, sits in the House of Lords. I think completely unacceptable to me that we should have archbishops and bishops in the House of Lords. I don't approve of that at all. But he... again, as everyone seems to do, there's always a lot of talk about... I mean, George Galloway likening... his fight in Rochdale with what's going on in, basically fighting against the Nazis during the 1930s and 40s. Here's what Justin Welby had to say about Rwanda.
The rise in international human rights law grew out of the horrors of the 1940s, where a government that in 1933 in Germany had been legally and properly elected passed horrific laws that did terrible things, starting from within a few weeks of the election of Adolf Hitler. That continued, and most historians agree that the first two elections gave the Nazi Party a legitimate majority.
Now, I'm of the view, Ivon, that is an absolutely shocking comparison to make, a blatantly, openly, ahistoric, shocking comparison, just as bad as George Galloway, what he said outside Parliament yesterday. Yes, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were elected to power. They very, very quickly, basically, turned on that democratic power, and basically after that they were dictators. Okay, but the idea to liken the Rwanda deportation policy with anything that the Nazis did is frankly obscene, is it not?
Well,
please tell me.
I'm here to comment on the law. I agree with you. I think.
But that man gets to have a say on the law.
I agree. I think that is a bit extreme. But the similarity is this: that you're sending vulnerable people with no protection and no access to justice. That's the point.
Why are they vulnerable, and what protection do they need?
Well, the government themselves accept that 50% of people coming across the boat are genuine refugees. So they're vulnerable in that sense, that if they go back to their country, they're going to face persecution and fundamental human rights abuses.
But they're only vulnerable when they're in those countries. It's different. There are people who are vulnerable because they have been sex trafficked, because they've been victims of torture, and there are people who have views where if they return to their home country, they may well be persecuted. We don't know which one. 90% of people arriving on the boats don't actually have any ID to show where they're from.
Yes, and that's a problem.
So how do we know that they're from the countries they say they're from, and what's happened to them is what happened to them?
I'd expect the Home Office to have systems and processes in place.
Well, you do? Why would you expect the Home Office to have anything in place?
Well, otherwise, let someone else have a go.
I doubt anyone at the Home Office can spell Home Office, for God's sake. They're so incompetent. Look, do I think that Rwanda's the solution? No. Do I think Rwanda will act as a deterrent? No. Do I really care whether a plane gets off the ground or not? No, I don't, because I think sending 300 people eventually to Rwanda isn't going to make a blind bit of difference to a drop in the ocean to the problem we've got. However, I do think it does matter that a democratically elected government, no, not Hitler, Rishi Sunak, democratically elected government with so many mandates from the British public over recent years on this, has the right to deal with illegal immigration.
Look, just think for 1 second about the impact it has on us. We carry the torch for human rights protection in the world. People look...
Do we?
No, we do.
Do we?
We do. I think we carry it globally.
I thought we were a terrible, awful country. We keep being told that by so many on the left.
No, we drafted the legislation. No, we carry the torch in the world. People look to us for leadership. And if we're abrogating our responsibilities to protect vulnerable people coming to our shores to a dictator like Paul Kagame, how does that look? A murderer, he imprisons his political opponents. How does that look?
Where can we send people that would be acceptable to you?
Well, that's interesting because the Supreme Court said the policy...
Sweden?
Yeah, Maldives. The Supreme Court said that the policy itself is not unlawful. So the policy is lawful. It just...
It's the choice of Rwanda.
It's the choice of Rwanda.
The thing is finding a country which is willing to take people who we don't want. Charlie Rowley, look, you were a special advisor in the government to senior people, like Michael Gove. What is the feeling in government on this?
Well, I think a lot of things. I mean, I think, look, in an ideal situation, obviously in a perfect world, we wouldn't have the Rwanda scheme. Nobody wants to have something like that where you do effectively have to put people on planes and send them to another country where you may not actually know, because they won't have ID, because you won't know their background, you won't know too much about them at all. It is something inherently, as a human being, uncomfortable. But the situation has become so bad over so many years of failed Home Secretaries and governments that haven't dealt with this. Even Tony Blair, you know, the archives revealed he tried to put people on, I think it was Scilly Island, you know, because as a way of deterring people or to hold people, that just to make sure that you don't have a pull factor into the UK. I think there are lots of issues around this. I do, for what it's worth, think if a plane does get off the ground, it might be slightly more symbolic than actually dealing with the policy.
I mean, it will be very, very symbolic. But when a plane gets off the ground with half a dozen people on, but it won't be. You know, it won't be more than that. And even if there were like 20 of those planes, but you know, literally there are more people arriving every day, every single day, than on those boats than would ever end up in Rwanda. That is not going to placate the British people who said, we've had enough of this.
And that's the challenge, I think, because I think it might do. I might disagree with Stanley, because I think it would be the first thing that a government has been able to do. This government will be able to take credit for the fact that after so many years of failed immigration policies, failed Home Secretaries, failed successive governments on this issue of illegal immigration, when people do have a right to come to this country, if you are a refugee or seeking refuge or fleeing persecution, of course you have a right to stay. But if you are an economic migrant, if you are someone who has just travelled on that boat, you've paid a criminal gang, you've basically broken into the country, there is no right to stay, and there shouldn't be that shouldn't be an example for others to follow. So you have to have something as tough as you possibly can to deter those people. But I do think as soon as the planes, and there should be, if there isn't a flight off the ground before the next general election,
it could well be in April again. I think there'll be more challenges. I mean, do you think that would be a game changer at all? Will that be a signal, or do you think that actually, you know, it's meaningless, it's symbolic?
I said, yeah, it is, and I said over a year ago, not a single flight will leave for Rwanda.
You still think ever, or before the next election?
It can't.
I think it will.
It can't. I'll tell you why it can't. No government minister would breach our international obligations. No government minister say, no, we won't comply with interim measures of the Strasbourg Court, although we have an obligation under law to comply with them.
Okay.
I mean, it would be a terrible thing for the government
and the thing is, again, when this is the thing which Charlie says about, you know, a government wanting credit for dealing with this issue, but if this issue has arisen on their watch, 14 years, Indeed. Yes, it was good, but people don't give credit for somebody who, you know, it's like, I'm trying to think of an analogy which is clean enough to use on air, but, you know, if people actually do something, fail again and again, and then they try and marginally try to clean up the problem, people don't go, oh, thank you so much, you're my saviour. They go, yeah, bare minimum, don't they? What is the solution then? Because
bilateral treaties.
You say that, but we're not going to have bilateral treaties with a load of the countries these people either come from or claim to come from.
You're going to go mad when I'm going to say this, right? You're going to go mad.
I'm all for a solution, but I just don't think that's the solution.
What does the EU want? What does the EU wants? Some form of limited free movement. That's what they want.
Hold on a minute. No, you're talking about bilateral. You're talking about us being able to send people back to France.
Indeed.
If somebody comes from France... If France were willing to take those people back, they wouldn't be effectively shipping them out to us every single day, towing those boats out to the centre of the Channel for our Navy and our NLI to pick them up.
We had the Dublin Convention when we were part of the European Union. Look,
the returns stopped years before we left the EU. It's a load of nonsense that's the reason why.
You haven't got your facts
right. They stopped, those returns stopped about a decade before that.
The year before we came out of the EU, we sent 70,000 people back under Dublin III. Simply not true. So we need to have some form of Dublin Treaty, not with France, with the EU. And if France doesn't do it, they get fined.
They don't care. They don't want the people back. I mean, they're actually crazy because actually if they didn't allow people to leave from Calais, people wouldn't be travelling into France to do that. But you know as well as I do, the whole of Europe, the whole of America, Canada, they are all facing a crisis about this. The voters are saying, enough. We don't want these people. They're not our problem. We're not prepared to pay for them. We're not dealing with the crime. And I'm sorry, I know people get upset about there is massive rising crime, violent and sex crimes and acquisitive crime, when you see massive influxes, particularly of these people arriving without the proper paperwork. That has been an issue in every country, whether it's in Sweden, in Germany, in France, in Austria as well, and in Italy. And people want this dealt with. The reality is they're busy dealing with their own problem. They're not going to take our people. The people who've come to our country, they're our problem.
Well,
they will argue.
I disagree.
They will argue that we take fewer than them, and therefore we should have more of theirs.
The EU will horse trade with us. They will do that because it's a global problem. And every country needs to take their fair share.
No, again, well, the British people, the French people, the Italian people, the German people are saying, no, we don't accept that that's our fair share. We don't want these people. They're not our problem.
Do you know how many Germany takes every year?
They take a lot more than us.
Over 100,000.
That's because they don't have quite as much choice, because they live within the Schengen area and they have open borders. And they've had this absurd policy since Angela Merkel's days in Syria in 2015. Come on in, the water's lovely. And it's been a financial and cultural, social disaster for their country.
Well, I think we should be taking, and I get masses of emails.
How many should we take?
We should be taking somewhere around about 100,000 a year.
100,000 people. We don't know where they're from, whether they're proven or not.
That's a processing issue. So if someone has got identity, I wouldn't even give them asylum.
But what do you do with them then?
Well, you have proper border controls. Agreement.
We'd love to have those.
If you don't have an identity document coming over, you get sent back to France. That needs treaties to do that. So that's a deterrent. So people, if don't have a document, cannot claim asylum.
I love your faith in the system. Good on you. I have zero faith.
I get a lot of abusive emails after I say stuff like
that.
Well,
I absolutely hope you don't. You shouldn't. You're actually someone who's actually trying to come up with a practical solution. I really appreciate you coming on the show. You're regular. Ivon Sampson, thank you so much.